Welcome to Browngrotta Art's 10th Zoom exhibition and the 8th episode of Art on the Rocks, an exhibition talk through with spirits. As many of you know, I'm Rhonda Brown, and for 30 years, my husband Tom Grotta and I have been promoting the work of dozens of international contemporary artists. For our Art in the Barn exhibition this fall, we curated a survey exhibition, Beauty is Resistance, Art as Antidote, which featured 36 artists spanning generations and geographies. In an era shaped by political division, ecological breakdown, and the commodification of nearly everything, beauty might seem like an unserious distraction. But for the artist featured in Beauty is Resistance, beauty is not a diversion. It's a purposeful mode of expression. Before we immerse ourselves in art, we'll introduce a drink, the Boston Tea Party, a gin and tea cocktail celebrating rebellion and refinement. The drink was researched by our talented in-house mixologist Max Vanwyck. His inspiration was food as resistance. The drink honors the American colonists who threw tea into Boston Harbor in frustration over British tariff policy. At Beauty is Resistance in person, we also served resistance-themed foods, including Let Them Eat Marie Antoinette cake pops. You can learn more about Max's cocktail and culinary creations at Run, Cook, Sleep, Repeat. Now to the presentation. We begin with a visual how-to of the Boston Tea Party by guest bartender Brandon Gonzalez. Cheers. Now to the art. The artist in Beauty is Resistance challenged the notion of beauty as mere aesthetic indulgence and reframed it as a tool for protest, remembrance, and imagination. As we determined which artists and works would be included in the exhibition, we found they fit loosely into four themes: reading between the lines, threads of memory, radical ornament, and ritual and reverence. The works we categorized as reading between the lines directly or indirectly engage with politics, injustice, ecology, and resistance. Some messages are forthright. Ed Rosbach's El Salvador, composed of camouflage cloth and stick bundles, offers a direct reference to the political conflicts of the 1980s. The body of work expresses Rosbach's sadness about the destruction in places like Lebanon and El Salvador. There was an irony in Rosbach's choosing such simple forms and techniques for complex images and meanings, according to Rebecca Stevens and Nancy Corwin, who wrote an essay in the catalog for Ed Rosbach's retrospective at the Textile Museum in 1990. He was surprised when Beirut Basket, another politically themed vessel, sold, they said, because Rosbach thought people didn't want baskets to carry images. Nonetheless, he would continue to include imagery in his works, as in this basket, No Name, that includes an image of a helicopter and armed men. 8 Faces of Concern Laura Foster Nicholson's cathartic response to Trump's first term is another explicit expression. Nicholson said she found joy and hope in getting each subtle expression about these feelings woven into the tapestry. The batik dyed and stitched cloth James Bassler wove for NRA approved references a 19th century Japanese fireman's jacket. It was also inspired by the 21st century debate about gun violence and what we as a nation could do to make our schools safe from the tragic incidents of our times. The NRA had openly suggested that teachers and students wear bulletproof vests. Often, Bassler says, our young students wear waterproof aprons when doing creative work. Here, in these woven sculptural forms, Bassler has added camouflage, used throughout history as a means of protection, to help conceal children in harm's way. Judy Mulford considered her art to be an autobiographical scrapbook, celebrating the essence of family, which she cited as the primary influence in her art. In Help Siring Soldiers to Sacrifice, Mulford added bullet casings to buttons, beads, and molded babies to make a statement about the plight of mothers in war zones. Her sympathies were with those who, she said, were siring soldiers for sacrifice. In Plan Your Parenthood, Overpopulation, Mulford references the old woman in the shoe to reflect her concerns about population and choice. Beaded polyform babies burst from every room and even from the roof of the tall, thin house she built and embellished with wooden dollhouse chairs, a knitting needle, and a rock. I have one choice, Mulford said, and it is pro choice. Someone in the United States sent UK artist Chris Drury a load of shredded dollars found in a dumpster. They sat in a drawer for several years until the pandemic in 2020, when he straightened some of the shreds, ironed them, glued them into strands, and then wove them into shredded dollar, something like the size of a dollar bill. Is it about currency? Is it about the state of the economy? For Drury, the work is intentionally ambiguous and can mean different things to different people. Encyclopedias have existed for around 2,000 years. From the specific to the general, the encyclopedia can be described as a summation of knowledge from a particular worldview. They have evolved considerably over time in terms of style, cultural perspective, purpose, contributors, audience, and the technologies available for their production and distribution. Some 20 years ago, Wendy Wall noticed that the printed and bound versions were being disposed of at an alarming rate. And soon after, most were no longer obtainable in that format. With this realization, she began a series with the not quite natural tree sculptures Stand for Knowledge, followed by several large-scale museum installations and three-dimensional sculptural works like Rebound Overlap, seen here. The reasons she continues to use these materials in unusual ways have remained the same: aesthetic quality, uniqueness, and the meanings that they carry. Each time I deconstruct a discarded encyclopedia book, Wall says, I revisit that which has come before, bound in stillness, yet part of the present moment, asking me to re-see in ways that engage my mind, body, and spirit. Wall views printed paper, particularly encyclopedias, from an elemental standpoint and as a material for expressing the ephemeral and the everlasting. Deconstructing volumes of information to reconstruct the parts through embodied knowledge is cyclical in nature, she says. In using encyclopedia pages as a material, the medium is literally the message. Curiosity under fire is part of this exploration, creating art that brings awareness to what can happen when access to information is denied and discarded. Other works that we designated as reading between the lines speak more subtly. Glenn Kaufman's Endangered Cities requires close reading. Silk-screened and woven images of deteriorating tile rooftops viewed through a grid evoke a quiet yet urgent concern for urban decay in Asia. For 14 years, from 1984, Glenn Kaufman spent half of each year in Kyoto, leading a study abroad program for the University of Georgia and doing his own work. There, he developed a complicated technique that combined twill weaving a surface pattern in silk, composing collages of photo imagery, photo silk screening those onto cloth, and abstracting the imagery further by applying metal leaf. The completed paper images were ripped apart and reassembled with obvious cracks moving through the works. The resulting views are often architectural, incorporating a grid that recalls Eastern shoji screens or Western window panes. The Endangered Cities series was Kaufman's effort to bring some attention to the destruction of the traditional tile roof domestic architecture in Kyoto and Seoul that he had frequently photographed for use in his work over the years. With yarn made from spun feathers using a technique from the 17th and 18th centuries, James Bassler creates a contemporary version of an ancient textile in which feathers were used to promote the double-headed eagle of the Habsburg Empire, designed to remind those subjugated of who was in charge. Recalling the reign of the Habsburgs, who ruled in Austria in 1276 to 1918 and Spain in 1516 to 1700, Donald and his Habsburg Empire is Bassler's wry comment on our current glorification of elitism through birthright, entitlement with no regard to proven achievement, which values profits over people. In Little White Lies, Deborah Valoma's message is so subtle as to be invisible. Writing tools were gendered for centuries in Western culture, Valoma explains. Needle and thread promoted for women, paper and ink reserved for men. Women stitched their stories, sometimes citing platitudes and rendering letters of the alphabet, at other times chronicling experiences of deprivation and degradation. Little White Lies is a quiet disruption of those conventions. Thread is used not to reveal, but to conceal. Truths whispered in ink are hidden under cross-hatched embellishments, stitched down by 18,432 pricks of the needle. Norma Minkowitz began with a giant crocheted flower head, not really knowing how this sculpture, Venus Trapped, would evolve. As it progressed, her inspiration leaned toward the female figure. Then, in combination with this giant flower head, she started creating thorn-like shapes that resembled female fingernails. Once painted red, her path was evident, she says. The flower, generally a symbol of renewal, peace, and celebration, became a Venus flytrap, a persistent threat to certain species, using thorns and sharp red fingernails to ward off any attacks. Venus Trap became a symbol of resistance, defending oneself against unwanted behavior. The beautiful flower can change to become a fighter if need be. Masako Nakahira is interested in the way stripes are used to establish order between people and space. In my work with stripes, I explore the tension between order and disorder, the structured mechanisms of weaving, and the shifting, fleeting impressions evoked by wind or light, the artist says. This interplay allows the familiar to reemerge as surprise, awakening dormant images within our memory. This work, Unaltered Series HPO HOY HYB, draws on the pictorial concept of illusion, focusing on the perception of layered depth. While no physical layers exist in this work, the artist used mokuitu, a technique in which weft yarns of different colors are twisted to form a single thread to create the appearance of superimposition. Through this ambiguity between reality and illusion, Nakahira takes a psychological journey, seeking to investigate what humans perceive in the space in between illusion and reality. For 28 years, Naoko Sereno has chosen to unravel jute, once twisted for utility, to face its liberated fibers. What I once discarded, she says, the frayed ends, revealed an unexpected beauty when held against the light, fragile, porous, and filled with air. For Sereno, it is a dialogue with the material, a resistance, and a shaping of memory itself. Through that struggle, by persisting, new shapes emerge, she says, as if summoned by light. Rooted 6 is one such form, born of that resistance and the possibilities it holds. John Garrett began the metaphorical 7 baskets during the pandemic in 2020. Constructed of scraps of hardware cloth, a welded wire mesh, the forms related to baskets and vessels, but were made of an open weave, some lacy, others more solid. He visited them regularly, but came to no conclusion as to how to finish them until he received an invitation to join Beauty is Resistance. In recent years, he says, I had seen many pictures of the destruction of wars in Sudan, Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza. Man-made and natural environments were being destroyed. Piles of debris littered landscapes. My painted paper baskets looked to me like structures distressed and damaged and covered in dust. Forms were painted and repainted and became new again, while speaking of horrors between the layers. Shiny metal leaf covered the interiors and exteriors of others. Two pieces were wrapped with rings of plied wire and tied down with more wire or fabric, as if waiting for more layers of concrete or plaster. One basket holds small bundles of twigs, which suggest repairs to buildings or people. Visual metaphors can slide past authoritarian controls, Gingelaki observes. The artist has pondered how she has resisted the censor in her own work. With liability, ouch, Locke was trying to make an oblique reference to her unhappiness about the 2016 election. She had heard many of the lies in the campaign and feared the man now in charge. The title is a double entendre, a small hint to her thinking beyond the work itself. The word ouch offers to viewers the opportunity to read into the work what is in their minds and hearts once Locke has attracted their attention. That is her understanding of the power of art to evade censorship. Lies are an enormous part of the current political conversation, she says. Evading censorship today opens the opportunity for resistance. Some of the works in the Reading Between the Lines grouping are poignant and personal. Weight of Commitment, 4 years old, made of Velcro hook and loop fasteners, stems from the complex emotions young Ju Kim faced during the IVS process. Rather than expressing these emotions directly, Kim allowed her creative process to reflect them. She pressed materials with her hands, mimicking the physical and emotional pressure she endured. As the piece hung on the wall, gravity pulled it downward, adding a weight that echoed her own weight of responsibility as an artist and a woman. An unexpected and meaningful moment emerged during the photography of the piece. As light and shadow played across the work, the silhouette of a child appeared, seemingly around 4 years old, floating in midair. Weight of Commitment, 4 years old, is not merely a sculptural object, but a symbol of resilience, beauty, and the transformation of struggle into creation. It invites viewers to reflect on their own lives and recognize how the pressures they bear can be reshaped into sources of strength and inspiration. Falling by Norma Minkowitz is also about the vagaries of health and well-being. Health issues create an increasing stress in my life, she says. Falling is about how I feel about my life situation right now, sort of falling without control. Leila Kulka is often occupied with simple silhouettes of the human body. Through these forms, she poses questions of identity and the human condition. In her painterly work, Departure 3, half a human silhouette is clearly outlined, yet the form is incomplete, a portion to be imagined. Recurring in Kulka's practice, such figures evoke the emotions and contradictions that define human existence, its strength and fragility, presence and absence. Her work reflects on what it means to be human today, she says, experiencing fear, pain, happiness, and enchantment, always becoming more human. Another take on the human condition is found in Irina Kolneskova's tapestry, Homage to Magritte, completed in 2022. The juxtaposition of a background of undyed linen and subtle figures in dyed silk evokes associations with fabrics from archaeological excavations. The tapestry presents a dialogue of images from Rene Magritte's paintings that highlight anonymity. Human figures devoid of individuality are depicted with a giant apple and a solid, dark mass at the bottom of the piece. The artist, who lived in Russia before emigrating to Germany, wished to illustrate how unimportant a person's individuality can be, specifically, how people are just a dark mass in the eyes of autocratic rulers. People are also the subject of Mary Giles-led relief. In 2007, Mary Giles began doing wall panels that dealt with her concerns about overpopulation, density, and boundaries. In lead relief, dozens of tiny figures cluster around the center seam. Fewer figures stand alone in the periphery, seemingly lost amongst faint marks of figures suggesting people on the margins unable to participate fully in the community. The work conjures thoughts about connection, community, identity, purpose, and more. There are works among those in Reading Between the Lines that suggest a hopeful message. Dualities by Neha Puri Deer invites contemplation on coexistence and transformation, reminding viewers of the quiet harmony that emerges when opposites are held together in a single frame, a thoughtful message for these contentious times. Her two circular motifs, one in negative and another in positive space, reflect ideas of balance and contrast. The earthy browns merge into deep indigo blues, evoking cycles of day and night, fullness and emptiness, and presence and absence. Toshio Sekiji imagines a merger of cultures in collage weavings like vertical to horizontal and vice versa, using repurposed newspapers, maps, and old book pages. New stories are created atop the old by reading the strips of papers and the areas he has enhanced with lacquer. He intertwined strips of paper from various countries, rewriting messages and creating a harmonious confluence of disparate cultures, languages, and nationalities, different from the facts on the ground. Sekiji began this series of works one night after reading some newspapers. He tore them into strips and then poured on natural Japanese lacquer, which he had used for antique restoration. He tossed the strips of paper like a salad. The loose fibers of the paper absorbed the lacquer, and when the strips were woven, the result was a lacquer enhanced tapestry of almost symbols, a tapestry that vanished at the border of meaning. In works like Neighbors, the segments of torn newspaper that appear on the surface of the work are like the frames of a cartoon, passing over and under each other. Newspaper stories like those in these newspapers from Israel lose their meaning. They lose their beginning and end, and new visions are revealed. Sustainability and concern for the environment are frequent themes in the works we designated as Reading Between the Lines. Abby Mackey's textile-based artwork engages with themes of ecology, history, and resistance through a process of reclamation and transformation. Working with discarded historic textiles, she deconstructs and reconfigures them, disrupting their original function to create new meaning. In Fragments of a Life Lived 3, she uses antique ticking fabric as both material and metaphor. Once utilitarian, worn by time and use, the fabric is reconstructed through stitching and further manipulated with paint and gold leaf. These interventions reimagine its surface to form layered, disrupted visual narratives, echoing stories of erosion, endurance, and renewal. The addition of gilding speaks to the overlooked value in what is often discarded, while the act of mending becomes a gesture of care and reclamation. The viewer is invited to read between the layers, to sense the life once lived through it, and to reflect on what we choose to preserve or let go. The marks Mackey makes, both visible and hidden, encourage a deeper reading of what survives, is forgotten, and might yet be reclaimed. Mackey's practice is a form of quiet resistance, honoring forgotten stories and reasserting the enduring significance of a craft in the face of environmental and cultural neglect. Mary Merkel Hess's Ember was made as a comment on the fires that seem to be burning everywhere, she says. In the upper Midwest, where Merkel Hess lives, residents are often reminded of fire when the smoke slinks down from Canada and they can see it and smell it in the air. The fires in Los Angeles affected Merkel Hess more personally. She has family there and often made trips west when she was small. It was my first big city and held wonders for me, the ocean, the crazy traffic, and open air architecture, she says. I had reacquainted myself with LA years ago when both of our kids and their spouses were in school there. All three of our grandsons were born in LA. I felt the effect of those fires. Merkel Hess's take on climate disaster is an ashen piece with smoldering red bits hidden among the strands. Other works in the Reading Between the Lines group speak to the tumult of these changing times. In Empties by Carol Sisson, cloth tape measures are first woven into a whole fabric, then cut apart with ends folded in on themselves, and finally sewn up with thread at the seams. These are empty baskets, Sisson says, referencing loss and empty words, actions, and promises. These baskets represent my personal state of being, my emotional response to empty nesting, and our present state of cultural and political affairs. From chaos to reality can be viewed from two directions, says artist Alexandra Stoyanov, who immigrated from Ukraine to Israel in 1990. Reading left to right at first, we see separate, scattered, non connected details. We see chaos. Going further, we see stronger understandings and connections: man, tree, nature. Finally, we see all connected to all in interaction. From right to left, we see an order going from an opposite direction. We understand the more closely we look onto the world surrounding us, the more clearly we can see separate the parts from the whole. We see a disintegrated world, the world which strives toward chaos. From today's reality, this is what happens. Our world looks more and more chaotic, from peace to war, from creation to destruction. The word fragment is a verb and a noun, defined as action and artifact. In her weaving entitled Fragment, Blair Tate produced elements, then reconfigured them. Broad woven strips are subdivided by double woven casings and further broken into larger, coarser woven blocks and smaller, finer scale blocks. These blocks are framed with correspondingly heavier and thinner connecting cords. When tied, they are both orderly and disorderly, messy, partially obscuring the clean geometries. Much of the field in Fragment is blank, a cream color, toned by the dark gray warp. Colored elements pop up, setting up smaller compositions that echo across the field, recording the splintering of communities. In Fragment, there is balance and imbalance, an irregular profile, internal voids. The piece could expand or shrink. I want the whole to feel tenuous, unsettled, Tate says, and in this way allude to the ubiquitous condition of change that defines our current times. 9 works that we showed in the in-person version of Memory, Beauty is Resistance, we categorize as threads of memory, in which fiber is used as a tool to archive personal, cultural, and collective memory. Beginning with slides of video stills, Leah Cook creates dramatic, larger-than-life woven portraits of children. Their sheer size could make the subjects less personal, yet, because of the way they are rendered, pixels translated into thread, it does not. Cook's double woven portrait, like Big Susan, Big Richard, and Binary Trace's young girl, are a source of intimate information and shared history. The panels challenge the viewer's perception as image and structure compete, depending on how near or far one stands in relation to the portraits, whether one views the positive front or negative back sides. The result is compelling, contemplative works of great power and presence that create feelings of recognition, nostalgia, and even grief and longing. James Bassler's Threads I've Carried reflects what the artist learned in his first color class at UCLA in 1953, once he realized there was an art department. The head counselor at Santa Monica High School had refused to allow him to take a ceramics class there because his GPA was too high. He pursued art despite that first obstacle, and Bassler taught Joseph Albers color theories at UCLA for some 25 years, another reference for this piece. This work is made of leftover warp and weft yarns from the past 65 years, including hand-spun and manufactured materials, synthetic and natural, dyed wool, silk, linen, cotton, and ramie. The result is a 4-selvaged weaving, a color study using complementary colors. In this work from the series, Bassler explored a new bag of saved yarns, which presented new thoughts. How bright or dark can I go before it upsets the whole idea, he asks. In this piece, I push the subtle to almost disappear and the bright to almost overwhelm. In creating Frozen in Time, Norma Minkowitz says, my thoughts focused on abandoned belongings that have been stopped in time. The images I chose are ominous and dark, as though there is a secret or story hiding between the pages of the book that is sealed and frozen and therefore can never be revealed. Memories are a snapshot of the past that haven't been affected by the present. I thought of a photograph that never changes. However, the act of remembering can also change the memory itself. I asked the viewer to be a participant in interpreting my work. On a trip to Japan, Mary Merkelhess says she was happy with a visit to the island of Hokkaido, where she found a completely different landscape than she had found in Tokyo. The light, she says, was like nothing she had ever seen before. She was transfixed by the quality of this light. The snow was iridescent, as if lit from within. The sky was a deep, even gray, but somehow not opaque. And the deep forest was monolithically dark. Working from a photo, she wondered what color were those trees actually? Deepest green, almost black or brown. She did multiple sketches over the days following, though she did not have her paints with her. That was followed by many more sketches from memory made when she returned to Iowa, continuing to experiment with this memory of Japan for several more years, never being able to capture all the details that crowded in her mind. Dark Woods is Merkel Hess's best attempt to capture something of the memory of these few days that she spent in the winter light of northern Japan. Lodger Rage's home uses color to recreate a personal recollection. The world has become smaller, Rage said of her work. The whole civilized world is connected and open. World culture seems close and colorful to me due to its diversity. I believe that modern world culture cannot be closed. Each of us grows up from the culture we live in through centuries, which further on is subjected to other impacts and becomes interwoven with the world culture influences. Yet, everyone has a home where they come from or feel they belong, she observed. Her home, which inspired this work, was a fishing village with wooden houses and boats painted their special gray by the sun and salty sea. John Garrett made braided diary #1 from crochet string and buttons that came to him after the passing of his maternal grandmother, Honey Swanson. Using remnants of various small tubes of thread, he braided a 4-element braid onto which he sewed small tags, which each had a white button selected from Honey's button boxes. Buttons were made from a variety of materials and correspond to a year in her life as recorded on the paper tag. Braided diary #2 shares a similar structure, a braid and construction, elements tied onto the braid to its predecessor. I use materials from the desert, which had entranced me as a child, Garrett said. Yucca seed pods, yucca twigs, sand, and seeds collected in small glass bottles. These I combined with manila shipping tags and collaged hardware cloth, materials from more recent artwork. Luster of Time by Neha Puridir reflects on the beauty of aging and the stories embedded in the passage of time. The work reveals delicate lines and textures that evoke growth rings of a tree or the patina formed on weathered metal. The deep circular form at the center suggests a meditative stillness, grounding the viewer amidst the rhythmic folds. Each stitch and crease becomes a quiet testimony to memory and permanence and transformation. This piece celebrates time as a collaborator, turning fabric into a canvas where aging itself becomes a mark of grace and resilience. Alexandra Stoyanov has said of her portraits of children, like that in Reflections, that they involve identification of a child picture from which it all started. This is your beginning. A multi-layered composition is a book with your biography, things that happened to you and your thoughts. You may have changed, but you identify yourself with this child who still lives in you, and you always return to him. Some of the individuals depicted in Alexandra Stoyanov's work are from her family albums, but they are meant to serve as archetypes of collected memories of generations, faces from the past, from childhood, faces that appear in memory and fade away. The stories are not about specific people, but mostly about us and the roles we play. Deborah Valoma's River of Loss, and an essay she recently authored entitled Thread Memory, commemorates her Armenian foremothers' unspoken chronicles of loss. For 100 years and more, their stories of violence, deportation, and exile were held in muted silence. But night after night, with heads bowed, she says, they stitched their memories in thread. In River of Loss, the handkerchiefs are trimmed with traditional Armenian needle lace, a technique Valoma first learned from her grandmother, and pay homage to the unacknowledged work of memory and mourning. The essay Thread Memory will be published in English and Turkish by the Hrant Dink Foundation in Istanbul in the volume entitled 23.5. The works in the section we designated radical ornament reclaim ornamentation, surface, and structure as valid forms of protest and joy. Nancy Konigsberg's Ocean is a meditation on movement and endurance, rendered in wire, an industrial material shaped into an evocation of tides, currents, and undertow. It's a loosely woven structure that resists closure, Guggenheim fellow Christy Anderson wrote, allowing light and air to move through its layered blue surface like water through reef or net. The work resonates with Rachel Carson's vision of the sea as a deep archive of time and transformation. In ocean, wire becomes wave and pattern becomes persistence. The piece positions material practice as a form of quiet defiance, an insistence on remembering, marking, and enduring. Konigsberg's concentric houses in black, silver, and gold wire evoke both shelter and exposure, speaking to the vulnerability of domestic life under political strain. The open lattice and nested forms suggest the fragility of home, where lives remain interwoven and resilient, even as larger structures of security begin to fray. The exposed grid and interiors suggest how private spaces are never sealed off, but remain entangled with broader systems of power, tension, and resilience. In works like Collider, artists claim beauty, surface, and structure as valid and vital modes of messaging. With training as an architect, Randy Walker's work straddles several boundaries of craft, sculpture, and installation. Collider plays with contrast, transparency and solidity, stability and collapse, visibility and concealment. His intricately threaded works embody a form of storytelling where ornament becomes a tool of transformation, commanding viewers to look more closely. Plastic, an amazing invention, says Gingelaki, a fabric-like substance that can be transparent as glass so that we can see what is inside, completely remarkable. So many uses. That aspect caught my attention when I was a graduate student. I used clear plastic in many ways to coat fiber and twigs. It had wonderful qualities to enhance my sculptures. Later, I used plastic strips of many colors to wrap twigs. I enjoyed that more than painting the branches to achieve a bright palette of hues. It was not until later, after the advent of biodegradable plastics, that I came to realize that plastics were becoming a grave problem and that they never disappear. Biodegradable just meant that they break up into tiny pieces, not as readily apparent in the landscape. Ubiquitous microplastics, tiny bits of plastic, are now a danger to both humans and animals. In the 1990s, Lucky was enthusiastic about a Johnson wax project making waste bits of plastic from their manufacturing process available for artwork. Graceful exit was the result. She was impressed that such a big and powerful company would acknowledge that its waste material could have a life beyond their commercial products. So many artists in that period were addressing reuse, recycling, post consumer life for discards. Here was a major company joining the conversation. I began to call my materials addressing sustainability industrial harvesting, she says, a parallel to my gathering pruned branches from orchards. Byproducts, not waste. In her Husk series, Anda Klonchik illustrates the Christian concept we are dust and we return to dust, with the cones of palm bark that resemble souls as heaps of dust. The healthy torsos of a man and a woman suggest that in life, all types of mental paths are still possible, she says. The artist wants to remind viewers that while our lives are in constant tumult of changing mental states and paths, we can often reorient ourselves in the direction we desire. Polly Barton observes that pink is a color of protest, witness the Pussy Hats of 2017. And Salvia sclera, the title of the work, is the genus name for the herbaceous plant clary sage, which 1, aids stress reduction, 2, has antibacterial properties, and 3, serves as a natural antidepressant. For Barton, time at the loom, working with the joyful pink and adding the image of clary sage, created an antidote for these stressful and uncomfortable times. One of the most distinctive elements of Mary Giles' work is the addition of thin metal strips layered over a surface or core, as she did in A Gathering Bowl and 65 Coppered Men. Another is her use of male figures in various contexts. The metal adds color, shine, and form, but also speaks to her interest in the human condition. Over time, some of these metals are going to change, she acknowledged, and that's fine. That is a part of nature's process and the aging process. Her use of the human figure also reflects the human condition in physical and psychological terms, linked to natural cycles of growth and decay. Among the series of sculptures that make up the work Sequis en Reste, a small human figure stands upright. In this series, Stephanie Jacques gives form to hybrid figures made from skeins of willow coated with gesso. A linen thread connects the scattered elements that compose them. Their knotted walls open into an exterior space. In Sequis en Reste 9, Jacques extends the anthropomorphic form with a tube of linen thread with sewn ends. Showing the shimmer, the finesse, the fragility, and also the vigor of this material, Jacques suggests the trace of a broken bond or possible reconnection. Certain emotions and intuitions propel Jacques to make specific objects. Each sculpture in the cycle, in the Sequis en Reste, incarnates a new state. The objects are not an end in themselves, but a document of what has passed. The final grouping are 13 works we identified as celebrating ritual and reverence, works that are informed by historical practices and traditions. In the 1980s, Glenn Kaufman created a series of pile-woven prayer rugs. All were woven of natural dyed silk using various plant materials. A smaller series of works from 1983 took the form of diminutive prayer rugs, with McDonald's arches replacing the traditional mihrabs, arch-shaped designs that indicate the direction of Mecca. Kaufman told interviewer Josephine Shea that rugs usually have a single point, but he thought Americans' devotion to McDonald's justified a double arch. When Irina Kolniskova first started working in textile, one of her sources was miniature Coptic textiles, the combination of linen background and a colorful silk imagery. In the Photo Atelier series, she combines these materials and adds old black and white photos displaying with images from these pictures, using silhouettes, details of dress, signs of profession. She creates collage and imitates collage and woven technique. We do not recognize a specific person in these pieces because the identities are not important to the series. It is the condensation and rarefication of color and texture that is essential. The works explore the paradox of a contemporary art language and ancient hand-weaving technique. Judy Mulford often incorporated photographs, words, beads, figures, antique, silver, buttons, and more into intimate and affecting sculptures that celebrate the family from birth to death. For Mulford, her art and identity were intertwined. My work is autobiographical, personal, graphic, and narrative, she said. Each piece I create becomes a container of conscious and unconscious thoughts and feelings, one that references my female ancestral beginnings. Mulford's work is informed by her studies of basket making culture in Micronesia, particularly on the islands of Truk and Aleuthe. She cites African and New Guinea artists as additional influences. In It's a Small World After All, Mulford incorporates photos, embroidered names of continents, and international coins to make a statement about the universality of people and families. Common within Nino Okore's body of works is the use of ordinary materials, repetitive processes, and varying textures that make references to everyday Nigerian practices and cultural objects. Okore is invested in changing the function, meaning, and historical or social context of her materials in this body of work. By transforming them from their original state of being and employing deconstructive and reconstructive techniques in works like Vogue, these materials inevitably assume new lives, different personalities, and cultural significance. While my sculptures generally draw attention to the textures and organic flow, Okore explains, they also highlight the visual richness and raw energies associated with cultural objects like cloth, mats, and other household objects used in Nigeria. Works like white cowries are not complete, says Okore, until the materials have undergone a series of transformative processes that change their functionality and meaning. At a certain moment, due to the growing political conflict in Venezuela, Eduardo Portillo and Maria de Vila sought refuge in the mountains and began to travel to places farther away from their home region, but still within their country. They visited remote places with rugged landscapes and places where people continued to live resiliently to understand the geographic and cultural space in which they live. They looked for moments of harmony in mountaineer communities that meet for a common purpose beyond their differences, especially during the traditional festivals. Our world is here, the couple has concluded, in these mountains, in small spaces. They are safe territories which help us to create, to build deep interconnections with life, family, friends, and nature, giving us the guidelines to follow in the midst of turbulence and changes. Vieja Journey by Portillo and Davila references their travels. The way is the goal of the journey, they say. It allows us to grow, reflect, and confront differences. It's a space to encounter new people and places that nourish our lives and our work. The couple has also worked in bronze, as in this work, Venus, using textiles as reference, as they feel bronze has a sense of timelessness. We began to experiment in a bronze foundry to imagine the passage of time in our textiles, how these would look like in many years in the future or as archaeological remains. An innovator in the field of American fiber arts, Ed Rosbach created works in dozens of textile techniques during his 5-decade-long career. His exuberant approach to making art, free from expectations and rules, is evident in works like Living Matter is Irritable. It arose out of his study of historic textile techniques while a young professor at the University of California, Berkeley. He was unafraid to experiment with labor-intensive techniques such as Andean discontinuous warp weaving, Native American coiled basketry, European lace, Coptic textiles, and Indonesian ikat. Rosbach reinterpreted these methods in his own unique 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional works. Weaver's weaver Kei Sekamachi was influenced by Bauhaus weaver Annie Albers and studied with Bauhaus-trained weaver Trudy Germonprez before creating the textile innovations for which she is known. Germonprez really opened my eyes to what weaving could be, Sekamachi says. From double weaving, I realized you could weave with more layers. And so by experimenting with multiple layers, I came upon the pieces that eventually became my monofilament hangings. In works like Study for Crossed Warp Effect, the teaching of these artists, still deeply relevant to modern design, are refracted through Sekamachi's uniquely original perspective. Jinsuk So has been creating artworks using steel mesh, something like tulle cloth, since before 2000. Construction began with steel mesh, which So silver plated to introduce a reflective precious surface through controlled oxidation in multiple stages. Next, she creates a flowing gradient of colors, capturing a sense of transformation in time. Finally, stitching the mesh with steel thread, evoking the art of binding a page or framing an image, bringing a tactile, almost narrative structure to the work. Deeply inspired by bojagi, a traditional Korean folk art form rooted in wrapping and layering, So has sought to reinterpret its cultural and aesthetic essence through a contemporary lens, creating a dialogue between tradition and modernity. Adela Akers was interested in patterns of other cultures and people. In Interrupted 2, she constructed marks on a painted bark cloth made by Mabudi tribe that she saw on a visit to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, adding horsehair and foil strips for which she is known. When I transfer the drawing to a larger scale, she said of a similar work, I spread it out so the lines don't have to line up, and it's fine with me if they don't. By spreading it out, then I have room for this other color to be added, again, to add more dimension so that the horsehairs float over more. Her painting of segments, she said, was sort of a shortcut for the very traditional Japanese technique, ikat. For Mary Giles, the human figure, as used in works like Gray Shadow, is both a formal reference and an element of commentary. She interpreted and expressed communication and intimacy in relationships in her figural work. Giles said she admired the directness and honesty she saw in tribal art and tried to incorporate those qualities in her own work. In making the Echo series of forms, Gisela Warburton imagined a place of uncertainty, a place of transience and loss. The works reference loved ones, trust, freedoms, challenges, and hopes. All bring particular crossing places, what comes before and what emerges in the aftermath as the unsettled settles. This sense of a crossing place is a thread which at particular moments has felt profoundly resonant, a cruci or cross that holds layered meanings, a warp and a weft, a suture to repair a wound, an ancient figurative human mark. The symbol for Warburton is about being. In the making of these forms, she says, I find a stillness that offers sanctuary within times of internal and external turmoil. In capturing fragility and nurturing repair, these vessels hold an embodiment of resilience and a sense that, in time, this too will pass. That ends our whirlwind presentation. Thank you for joining us. For more images of works, replete with no end of ideas and innovations, check our website, YouTube video, and the Beauty is Resistance catalog, which includes an insightful essay by Elizabeth Essner, Associate Curator at the Museum of Fine Art, Houston. Thanks again to Max at Eat, Cook, Run, Sleep, Repeat, and to our teams at Juice Creative and Space 67, who have provided technical assistance. Save the date for our Spring Art in the Barn exhibition at Browngrotta Arts in May 2026. We'll explore works that reassert the significance of tactile knowledge and craft. The exhibition, Material Intelligence, Matter Transformed, will bridge the conceptual and the corporeal, inviting viewers to consider materials not as passive components, but as active agents with histories, limitations, and voices. The exhibition will feature artists who meet curator and historian Glenn Adamson's definition of material intelligence, a deep understanding of the material world around us, an ability to read that material environment, and the know-how required to give it new form. Hope to see you in the spring. Thanks so much for tuning in.